We do want to get you minimum 3-5 points at least so that even on your worst day, you're still getting a 175 plus. This is Logan, and he's looking to improve from a 172 to a 175 and beyond in the next 3.5 months. My name is Steve Schwartz, and I've been teaching the LSAT for the past 20 years. Today, Logan's going to bring me his biggest LSAT challenges, and I'll help him address them as he looks to improve by 3-5 points and beyond. Tell me a little bit about what led you to reach out for today and how I can help.
I have a 172 under my belt, like an official score. I'm trying to get that up, get to a top score. And I'm making a lot of progress in terms of keeping accuracy in the amount of time that you're given in the test. Because timing has been an issue for me. So I've been getting a lot better with the timing. But I'm just trying to work through how we can take that 172 to, a higher score, like a 175 and above. And given how the curve can shake out, that could just be 1 or 2 more questions, right? So just how I can approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple questions can make all the difference, but we do want to get you minimum 3-5 points at least so that even on your worst day, you're still getting a 175 plus, right? Now, how long do we have till your test?
I'm planning on taking it in August.
Okay, good. So we've got roughly 3.5 months between now and then to get you at least 3 to 5 points. A 172 is already an amazing score, but it doesn't mean that you're done. When Logan joined me on this call, he wasn't asking how to go from average to great. He was asking how to go from great to elite. And the truth is, that jump from 172 to 175 and above is often harder than going from a 155 to a 165 because every single question matters. One single careless misread, 1 minute lost, 1 question rushed, and you drop back below your goal. That's why your review process has to evolve. It's no longer about fixing gaps in your understanding. It's about fine-tuning how you take the test. If you're already in the 170s, your edge is going to come from time management, pacing, and in-depth surgical level reviews. Now, in your application for this call, you mentioned something around taking more full-length timed simulated exams. Do you feel like you're taking enough of those right now?
I feel like I am. I just don't think I've gotten enough of them under my belt this, go around through my studying. I think I would like to have more at this point. Before I take the test, I would like to have more.
Okay.
But I think my schedule is pretty good. I've been taking 1 a week for the past 4 or 5 weeks. I'd like to continue that.
Do you see yourself being able to continue taking 1 a week for the next 3.5 months?
I think so, with a couple exceptions here and there, but so far the pace has been pretty good. I've been able to manage that.
Okay, so just to put some hard numbers on this here, if we've got 3.5 months, which is roughly 14 to 15 weeks, and you say that with some exceptions, you could take 1 every single week, that means that probably you'll be able to take, say, 12 between now and the exam. Do you feel like 12 could be enough, or do you want to find ways to increase the frequency as well?
I think that could very well be enough. It's possible that more might be necessary, but I feel like that would put me in a lot better place than I am now.
Yeah, 12 is a decent number. The question is what you're doing with those 12, right? Because it's not just quantity of exams taken, it's also quality of the review that you're doing after the fact. And so how many hours are you typically devoting to your studying overall in the course of a week, and then in terms of the review in particular?
I would say probably 5 or so hours a week. So, 2.5 for the test, and then maybe another 2.5 drilling problems or reviewing. I would say the review process in total is maybe an hour or so each week.
Okay, so you're spending 1 hour on your review out of the 5 hours that you're studying, and that 1 hour is to review the handful of questions that you got wrong or had difficulty with. And when you're scoring in the 170s, you're not getting that many wrong, and you're not having difficulty with that many. So, how many questions are you reviewing over the course of that 1 hour, would you say?
Sure, I would say anywhere from 5 to 10 questions, 5 to 10 max.
Okay, so 5-10 questions. It means you're spending roughly something like maybe 8 to 10 minutes per question that you review.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay, do you feel like that's an adequate amount of time?
I think most of the time that is.
Okay. Yeah, normally I would say an hour to review a single exam is not enough time, and that 5 hours a week is not enough time to study.
Okay.
But LSAT is not one size fits all, right? Because you're already scoring quite well. That being said, though, if we could get you an additional couple of hours per week to study and a couple of hours more to review, I wonder if that might yield some benefits, just because the higher your score, the more you've got to fight for each additional point.
Right. That makes sense.
Logan's only studying 5 hours a week right now, and that's working for a 172. But when you want to squeeze out those last few points, the question isn't, do I have more time? It's, do I know what to do with more time? That extra hour you add into your studying can't just be more drills. You've got to review differently. You've got to track the time you're spending on each section, and you've got to figure out why you're getting bogged down and what it might cost you later. That's what I call post-game analysis. If you can spend just 1 more hour each week looking at how you took the test, not just what you got wrong, you'll start to see those gains. So when you look at the 5 hours you're devoting, do you have time to study more? Would you want to?
I think I would have more time, and I would like to do that if I know how to spend that time effectively.
Okay, so the thing holding you back from studying more is not the lack of time, it's just knowing how to make it effective.
I think that's the main thing.
All right, so when you think about the 5 hours that you're spending now, if I said that you had to spend 1 additional hour, just 20% more, 1 additional hour of studying to make it 6 hours a week, where would you want to spend that time?
I'm not sure exactly on what areas, like if I would want to spend that on more questions. I think just broadly, I would be thinking about how can I try and especially make these difficult questions, how can I get to the right answer faster when I'm taking the test? Because I think I often spend too much time on some difficult questions, and that just affects my performance overall on the entire section, or it just makes it, more difficult for me to get easier questions right because I have less time to devote to those, things like that. Just arriving to the right answer faster and doing it more accurately if it's a really hard question.
Yeah. So would you say then that the reasons you're getting questions wrong are not necessarily due to the question type or a lack of understanding even, but rather the time allocation?
I think so. I think it's time allocation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that can be huge. And the cool thing about working on your pacing and your time management is that you don't actually have to increase your understanding, strangely enough. You've just got to get better at shifting where you devote your time. And so Are you finding that you're getting bogged down or stuck on certain questions?
I think so. I think I lose track of time a little bit sometimes on some difficult questions. Like I might feel like I'm only spending a little bit more time on that question as opposed to others, but in reality, maybe I'm spending like 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes on that question. And if there's like 4 or 5 questions like that on the test, that really makes it difficult to get that section completed.
Yeah, absolutely. It can have a huge impact, right? Then, as you said, you're not getting to devote other time to other questions that might need it even more.
Right. And I think there's also some anxiety there too, especially when I get towards the end of a section. Usually those are the harder questions, and I'm aware of that. And when I see the time that I have left, I know that I might not have enough time to really fully understand and get those questions, and that can affect my performance as well.
Yeah, of course. Are there patterns in the types of questions you find yourself getting bogged down in?
There is one general pattern. I think it tends to be the most challenging questions on a section. I think what I mean by that is the answer choices aren't particularly strong. There might be 2 or 3 that are clearly just not correct, but between 2 of them, it could be, neither one of them seems like a particularly strong answer, and it could be hard for me to figure out which one is the correct answer. Or like a more concrete example, if there's a stimulus and you're supposed to identify the flaw in the argument, and there's multiple different flaws in the stimulus, there's a lot wrong with the argument, and maybe 2 of the answer choices sort of touch on some of those flaws, but don't fully capture it, at least in my mind. I can have trouble picking out which one of those answer choices is correct.
Yeah, that's good that you're recognizing this after the fact. I mean, this is what proper review could look like, is not just reviewing the questions that gave you trouble from an explanations perspective, but your post-game analysis could be looking at your time management to determine what could you do differently the next time around. And so noticing the patterns in your behavior in terms of where you allocate your time, where you get bogged down, where you get stuck, so that you can learn that meta lesson, extract that key insight to avoid that same behavior pattern in the future if it's not serving you.
Right.
So this is the sort of thing I might want you to work on if you had 1 additional hour is
okay.
Maybe you spend 1 hour from the explanations and understanding perspective and another hour looking at how you allocated your time across all 4 sections of the test and seeing if you spent just 15 minutes per section looking at where did you spend your time in a less than optimal manner. So could you shift where you're devoting your time to help you squeeze out even 1 or 2 more points just by devoting the time in the right areas?
Right. I think that certainly would be possible. And in terms of feeling rushed, it can vary from section to section, but I think in general, at best, I might be finishing the section with maybe like a minute of extra time, and then at worst, I have like 2 or 3 questions that I'm really not able to engage with just because of not having enough time at the end.
And that's a huge issue, right? I mean, running out of time so that you can't really engage properly with 2 to 3 questions. I mean, if you were the kind of student who was saying, I'd be happy with anything between a 155 and a 160, that's not a huge deal because 2-3 questions, you'll still be in that range likely. But 172 to 175 could be like 2 questions, right? So we've got to make sure that you have the time to tackle every question with ideally around 3 minutes to spare.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it may be that in addition to not getting bogged down and preventing yourself from getting bogged down, you may also want to look at where can you speed up to be faster than average. So for example, as you alluded to earlier, there is that general order of difficulty in logical reasoning, meaning the questions get tougher as the section goes on. That means that you certainly don't want to be running out of time at the end of the section when you are encountering the most difficult questions, as you already know. But on the other end of the spectrum, you want to tackle the easiest questions at lightning speed so that you then build up the time bank for the tougher questions that come later. And so what I'll typically recommend for any student who's even just above a 165, so this certainly applies to you as well, is I would want you to attack the first 10 questions in total about 10 minutes. So a minute per question for the first 10, faster than your average of approximately a minute 25 per question, so that you are then building up that time back in of an additional, say, 5 minutes or so to apply to the harder ones later that truly need it.
Okay, that makes sense. And in terms of kind of putting that into practice, in those first 10 questions, what does that kind of speed look like? Is that reading the stimulus and then just, reading the question and then just quickly scanning through the answers and identifying it, what you think is the right answer super fast, or is it still going through reading each answer choice and thinking things through?
Yeah, good question. So I will always say, just to be safe, you do want to go through all 5 choices. But at the same time, I also want you to trust your gut, meaning you're not second guessing yourself. You're not double checking and triple checking on these just because you probably got it right, just going with your gut. And of course, in a perfect world, yes, we would double check and triple check everything, but the LSAT is strictly timed. So I would rather you not double check these so that you have more time to devote to the trickier questions that truly need the double checking. And so if this means that you read a question in the first 10, you have a prediction, you see your prediction in the choices, you'll quickly look through the remaining choices really fast just to make sure, but that's it. If you see a choice that matches your prediction, you don't second guess yourself and say to yourself, it couldn't possibly be that easy, because in fact, in the first 10, yes, it could be that easy. In a number 21, in contrast, it might not be that easy, and it might be that choice A seems really good, but if you picked A and moved on and never even looked at choices D and E, you would miss out on the fact that D and E also look really good, and then you've got to make some tough decisions and do a bit more analysis. But first 10, go with your gut, be ruthless and maintain your speed just because you've got to move on to the harder ones later.
Right, okay, that makes sense. I think in practice I wind up often kind of doing the opposite. Like, I'm very cautious, and then as time starts to run out, I think, I have to speed up, I have to pick up the pace, and then I wind up not being able to be as judicious. And
yeah, it's a really common issue a lot of students have. But if we could take the extra, or I'll say, even just to be blunt, I'll say wasted 5 minutes you're devoting to the first 10 questions, and instead take those 5 minutes and devote them to the last 5 questions, that alone could get you another 3 points that you need to get you into the 175 plus range, because they will be more impactful when spent on the harder questions that actually need the time.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
It sounds like the primary blocker or constraint for you right now is just where you are allocating your time. And so that's why I'm saying carve out that 1 additional hour a week just to look at the post-game analysis for every test that you take and see, did I spend too long on this reading comp passage? Did I spend too long in these first 10 questions? And you could just watch the clock and mark, okay, at passage number 1, I finished it 9 minutes into the section. Passage number 2, I finished it 18 minutes into the section. Passage number 3, maybe you spent 15 minutes and that's a huge problem. But we don't know until we do that kind of analysis, and then we'll see, okay, like the harder passage needs more time, the easier one needs less than average, and the same is true for logical reasoning.
Okay, that makes sense.
One of the biggest issues we uncovered in this call was that Logan was being too careful early in the section. He was spending too much time on the easy questions, trying to be perfect, then scrambling at the end when it really counted and he needed the extra time. This is super common, and the fix is quite simple. Build a time bank. Logical reasoning questions are presented in a general order of difficulty, meaning they get tougher as the section goes on. And if you're aiming for anything anything above a 165, you should aim to knock out the first 10 questions in roughly 10 minutes total. That gives you extra time for the tougher questions later in the section that truly need it. So don't double check yourself on the easy ones. Don't second guess yourself. If your gut says it's choice B and it matches your prediction, pick it and move on. The minutes that you save early in the section might be just what unlocks your 175 plus.
Yeah, and then I think another just kind of general issue that I've been having on occasion, it's often in the first section of a prep test that I'm taking. Sometimes I'll just have like a really off section, and in the actual test day, I really don't want that to happen. Like on my last prep test, I got like 5 questions wrong in the first logical reasoning section. It was the first section of the test, and then I only got 2 other questions wrong on the entire rest of the test and the quasi-experimental section. So I just had a really off section, and that if that happened in the test day would really bring my score down. So how should I go about trying to analyze that and figure out what's going on there?
Well, so when we look at why a test or section was off, I mean, there's a variety of different potential reasons, and this comes down to tracking the data. So I'd be looking at things like, first off, let me ask you this. Do you have any hypotheses or guesses as to what might lead your performance to be off?
Part of it might just be not being kind of fully warmed up, fully in the headspace of the test. I think that's part of it. Usually it's timing as well. Like I haven't really found the right rhythm for the section. Like in this last prep test, the first section, I kind of was running out of time. I got to every question, but not the last 5 questions were pretty rushed, and I made several mistakes there. So I think that's part of it.
Okay. Yeah, so we've covered the time management aspect of it.
Right.
You have some ideas to apply there and see what the impact's going to be. The other thing I would look at regarding warm-ups, though, that's a pretty easy fix. I mean, I'm going to recommend if you feel like you need to get warmed up, then do some warm-ups, right? So before you start your timed sitting, you do a couple questions. Could be a couple of gimme logical reasonings that you've seen before and feel smooth about. It could be a favorite reading passage that you feel pretty comfortable with. These are not to judge yourself. These are not to trouble yourself. They're really just meant to go through the motions, kind of like you were picking up a barbell with no weights, with no plates on it at all, just to get your form down, get your muscles warmed up a little bit, so that when you do the actual movement, it's going to be better posture. So here in this case, I'm going to say same deal. Just go through the motions, even if you already know the answer. That's okay. The point's not to measure yourself. And so if you did this for, say, your next 4 or 5 practice tests, you could see, was this effective? Did I feel ready to go the second the actual scored section began? If you have a dozen practice tests on a weekly basis from now till the test 3.5 months from now, you have plenty of time to actually experiment and see what works.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Logan had a test where he bombed the first section, logical reasoning, and it nearly sunk his score. The rest of the test was nearly perfect. This happens all the time, especially on test day. The fix is to engage in warm-up drills prior to the exam. Before every practice test you take, do maybe 5-10 questions you've already seen before. You're not trying to learn anything new here, you're just getting your brain in motion. Think of it like you're warming up before a workout. You wouldn't hit a max squat cold right out of the gate, so don't start your LSAT cold either. This one habit could save you from having to retake the entire exam just because of one bad section.
Another kind of time-related question. I'm struggling sometimes to approach difficult questions where I'm just not getting the answer. I might have it narrowed down 2 answer choices, but between those 2, I'm just really not sure. And I think when I'm sitting in the section, oftentimes I'll go back to the stimulus and then I'll read through that again. I'll read the answer choices, try and figure out what they're actually saying, how they're different from each other. And sometimes I'm still just kind of at a loss and not entirely sure. What do I do in those circumstances? Do I just guess and move on, or how do I approach those when I'm just kind of stumped?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this is the entire point of the review process after the fact. And so the real solution here is never be in that situation in the first place by reviewing all your previous exams that you've done, because you already have a large data set from all the questions you've done prior to see what are the types of situations where I get down to 2 and I get stuck and I can't distinguish between the 2. And so during your post-game analysis, during your review process, you can look at the minutiae or the finer points of what makes a wrong answer choice tempting and what ultimately makes it wrong, and what makes a right answer choice unappealing and what ultimately makes it correct. And what are the differences, like the degree of certainty in the conclusion or the qualifiers that are limiting the category of whatever they're discussing. So the limiting the scope, for example. And so if you review that thoroughly for all your prior questions, then when you encounter a new question, you are less likely to be in that same situation. In the moment, I would look for those kinds of small distinctions. It may be hard to see it given the stress of the timed setting and the stakes feeling real, but if you can't get it, then during your review, drill down into exactly what put you in that position so that you can avoid it next time around. And so just keep learning those lessons more and more over time.
Okay, that makes sense.
We've all been there, stuck between two answer choices. You reread the argument, reread the choices, and you still have no idea which one to pick. The mistake most students make is they try to brute force their way through it on test day, but the real solution happens during your review process prior to test day. Logan and I talked about this. You've got to ask yourself two questions after the fact. Why was the wrong answer choice tempting, and why was the right answer unappealing at first? That's where you start seeing LSAT patterns, the same old tricks, the same old subtle wording traps. But you don't want to be solving that dilemma on test day itself. You want to have solved it already a dozen times or more during your review process. So for every question that you get wrong, every question you have difficulty with, even if you got it right through guessing, but it could have easily gone the other way, engage in that in-depth review process using the Socratic review method.
And in terms of measuring progress, seeing where I'm doing, as I said, I already have a test under my belt. I want to kind of make sure that I'm ready whenever I take the test. I'm aiming for August, but I don't want to take it in August just for the sake of taking it if I'm not ready. How do I gauge that? Especially given that registration is well before August, and I'm gonna need to be thinking about that beforehand. How do I track my progress? How do I kind of gauge where I'm doing, especially when there could be some variation from prep test to prep test, and each question can make a major difference.
Totally. I mean, there can be variation. Scores do naturally fluctuate by at least a couple of points on each end, and so the way to mitigate the impact of fluctuations is to have a larger sample. So if you have only two exams, and one's a 172 and one's a 177, that's a really big range, especially given the stakes at that high end of the spectrum. And so I would instead say, let's look at a sample size of 5 exams. Take your most recent 5 scored practice tests, and then you'll have a better indication of where you stand. And if you take them over a more compressed time frame, max over the course of 5 weeks, if you had the space to do them over the course of less time, like 3 weeks, that might be even more accurate, because then you would be limiting the time duration that you're looking at, so that kind of impacts the progress a little bit more. And so you'll see, okay, 5 exams taken over 3 to 5 weeks, that gives you a reasonable gauge of how you're likely to do on test day. Then you want to discount it by a couple of points, just in case the stress of the real thing could impact you, or a bad proctor could impact you a little bit, maybe. But that gives you an indication of where you are, and then you can make a more informed decision as to whether you'll actually be ready by the August LSAT. And yes, there are registration deadlines, there are postponement deadlines, but you can still withdraw even the day before the exam if you didn't feel that you were ready, and law schools would never know. But I'd say look at what happens as we get into June, July, early August, and then you can make a more informed decision.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's super helpful.
Logan brought up a great question. He asked me, how do I know if I'm really ready to take the LSAT for real? My answer is, look at your most recent 5 practice tests. Don't just look at one and say to yourself, I'm ready. Look at the last 5 practice tests you've taken under realistic conditions, then take the average of them. If that average is where you want to be, or within a couple points, and you know why you missed what you missed, then you're probably ready. But if your scores are still swinging up and down, fluctuating wildly, that means your process isn't stable yet. So take more tests, track your trends, then decide. Don't do it just by gut feeling. A lot of students review their practice tests by reading the explanation and saying to themselves, oh yeah, that makes sense. But that's not review, that's reading. Logan realized during our call that his review was missing one essential layer: diagnosis. He wasn't asking, where did I spend too much time? Did I panic at the end? Was my pacing consistent? But once you start tracking that, the test becomes a blueprint. Every mistake, every slip in your timing, every moment of hesitation, that's valuable data. And if you treat your review like data analysis, not just correcting mistakes, that's how you make the jump from good to great, and in Logan's case, from great to elite.
And in terms of my review, it seems like I need to devote more time to that post-test analysis, figuring out what went right, what went wrong. Generally, I sit and take a prep test during the weekend, and then depending on when I take it in the weekend, I'll review it then, or I'll review it throughout the week. But I think there's still things that I could be doing throughout the week. Should I be doing practice sections here and there, which I've been doing on occasion, or should I be doing something different? Like, how should I spend that extra time that I have throughout the week studying?
There's a couple different ways you could devote it. I mean, one way is, yes, doing individual timed sections, since pacing has been a recurring theme in this conversation. I do think that doing more timed sections would help you when you don't have the time or space to do a full exam. You could also, of course, you meet with your coach. You could join the small group semi-private classes as well in the evening, just for additional exposure to get different coaches' takes on things. You could join the study groups as well, just to immerse yourself more in the LSAT community. And with your scores, you'd be on the higher end, but that's great because you can also learn a lot by teaching as well. So just different ways to get at the issue of how do I improve my LSAT abilities. One way is by teaching. One way is by just getting more questions under your belt, more sections under your belt. It's all going to help.
Okay, that makes sense. And then just thinking about looking ahead a little bit more, pacing for me is kind of like the biggest issue right now, but hopefully I get that figured out. I think there's going to be some questions that I'm at that point going to be getting wrong, like a couple here and there. And hopefully I'm at that point well before the August test dates where I can work on those like couple questions. Like usually reading comprehension is not so much of a timing issue anymore. I've pretty much gotten that down, but I still usually get 1 or 2 questions wrong on that section each go around. And there's not really a consistent theme. It's just make a mistake in the moment, or it's just a really tricky question. So how do I really like drill down on those? What are some advice that you have for those?
I mean, sometimes you're getting hard questions wrong just because they're hard. And the solution is more review. When things seem opaque, when they seem difficult to parse, it could just be that in the moment. But then after the fact, you're reviewing on your own or you're discussing it with your coach, you can then find an angle from which to attack it where you're like, oh, it makes sense now. You can also engage in drills. Like if it's a question of not understanding the passage thoroughly, you could try to rewrite the entire passage in simpler language, like you were going to explain to a 5-year-old. If it's a difficult logical reasoning style question, you could work on similar logical reasoning questions of that type, because reading comp is like one massive logical reasoning stimulus. So if you can better highlight the parallels, that might be another way to approach it. But it's going to come down to review.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Any other questions, Logan?
I think that's pretty much all I had in terms of questions.
Cool. Well, it was a pleasure. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think the importance of really spending a lot of time on review. I do take review very seriously. I recognize that that's important, but I don't think I spend as much time as I should on really running through the test and figuring out what went wrong, not just in terms of accuracy, but in terms of time allocation and really the test as a whole, like diagnosing how I felt about the test, how I was doing in the moment. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. Good. No, of course, I'm glad you found it helpful. And again, I mean, you're on the right track. You're doing the right things, but don't be complacent because you're already doing well. Think about how 5 hours a week got you here. What if you were to up it with just 1 additional hour? What if you were to add on 5 additional hours? How much more could you improve if you had the time to engage in that deeper review? If you had the time to look at how you're allocating your time in addition to a more explanations-centered approach. It's 3.5 months till the test, but if you just doubled your studying now for that short period of time, a few months, it could have a massive unlock for the entire rest of your legal education, your law school career and beyond.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, Logan, it was a pleasure. If you need anything at all, just reach out. I'm happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Have a good one.